At the top of an isolated hill, surrounded by dense trees, stood a majestic manor with a charmingly outdated allure. The Anderson family, consisting of Thomas, Emily, and their little daughter Sophie, decided to spend a quiet weekend in this mansion from another era. As soon as they crossed the large wooden doors of the manor, an oppressive atmosphere welcomed them. Portraits of ancient family members adorned the walls, the eyes of ancestors seeming to follow every movement of the small family. The creaking of aged boards beneath their feet added a sinister echo to each step. Sophie, a curious 6-year-old, was fascinated by the history of the manor. She enjoyed running through the vast corridors, imagining games with invisible friends. Her parents, however, couldn't ignore the strange sensation that pervaded every corner of the manor. As night fell, the Anderson family gathered in the living room, illuminated by the flickering light of an old fireplace. Sophie, sitting on the floor with her toys, began to talk to an imaginary friend named Charlotte. The parents smiled, thinking it was a simple manifestation of a child's imagination. However, as the evening progressed, inexplicable events began to occur. Toys moved mysteriously in Sophie's room. Children's laughter echoed in the deserted hallways. Thomas and Emily exchanged worried glances, their concerns growing as the night unfolded. At the top of an isolated hill, surrounded by dense trees, stood a majestic manor with a charmingly outdated allure. The Anderson family, consisting of Thomas, Emily, and their little daughter Sophie, decided to spend a quiet weekend in this mansion from another era. As soon as they crossed the large wooden doors of the manor, an oppressive atmosphere welcomed them. Portraits of ancient family members adorned the walls, the eyes of ancestors seeming to follow every movement of the small family. The creaking of aged boards beneath their feet added a sinister echo to each step. Sophie, a curious 6-year-old, was fascinated by the history of the manor. She enjoyed running through the vast corridors, imagining games with invisible friends. Her parents, however, couldn't ignore the strange sensation that pervaded every corner of the manor. As the family prepared to sleep, distant cries and faint whispers filled Sophie's room. Concerned, Thomas and Emily rushed into their daughter's room to find her in tears. Sophie explained that Charlotte was sad, that something terrible had happened to her and her family a very long time ago. Shivers ran down the parents' spines as shadows danced in the room, illuminated by the light of an old oil lamp. Determined to uncover the truth, the Anderson family began to explore the manor in the silent darkness of the night. They discovered a room locked for generations, and upon opening it, a tragic story unfolded. Decades ago, a little girl named Charlotte had lived in the manor with her family. They fell victim to a mysterious curse that led to a tragic end. Charlotte, the sole survivor, had mourned the loss of her family over the years. Guided by Charlotte's spirit, Sophie helped the Anderson family soothe the tormented soul of the little girl. The curse was lifted, but the manor retained a melancholic atmosphere. The family left the manor at dawn, leaving behind the poignant story of Charlotte and her family. The manor, still standing on the hill, kept the secrets of its past and the memory of the little girl who had found peace in the fleeting friendship of another child.
Un groupe d'alpinistes, guidé par Alex, s'élance vers l'Everest.
Au fur et à mesure qu'ils pénétrèrent dans la grotte, la température chuta brusquement et une lueur mystérieuse éclaira le passage étroit. Les parois semblaient ornées de symboles énigmatiques, témoignages d'une ancienne civilisation oubliée. Le groupe avança avec précaution, l'écho de leurs pas résonnant dans les profondeurs de la grotte. Au cœur de la caverne, ils découvrirent un sanctuaire ancien, où des pierres rituelles étaient disposées en cercle. La lueur des pierres semblait réagir à leur présence, pulsant doucement comme un cœur mystique. Les villageois, intrigués et inquiets, examinèrent les symboles gravés dans la pierre, tentant de comprendre le lien entre ces événements mystérieux et le sanctuaire oublié. Alors qu'ils scrutèrent les parois, une voix sépulcrale se fit entendre, révélant une ancienne prophétie liée aux montagnes et à une porte interdimensionnelle. Les lumières dansantes dans le ciel, les voix dans le vent, tout était lié à une force ancienne qui cherchait à établir un pont entre les mondes. Le groupe comprit que leur village était devenu le point focal de ces phénomènes surnaturels. Ils devaient prendre des décisions difficiles pour préserver leur communauté. Certains choisirent de sceller la porte, de sacrifier la tranquillité du village pour protéger le monde des mystères au-delà. D'autres, attirés par la promesse d'une connaissance ancienne, décidèrent d'embrasser les secrets des montagnes. La grotte fut scellée, mais le mystère persista dans le village. Certains murmuraient que la frontière entre les mondes restait fragile, tandis que d'autres tentaient de revenir à une vie normale, laissant derrière eux les légendes qui hantèrent leur nuit. Le petit village niché au creux des montagnes, autrefois paisible, restait désormais marqué par les récits d'une époque où les frontières entre réalité et mystère s'étaient estompées. With determination, they sealed the entrance of the cave, containing the mystical force within. The lights vanished from the sky, the whispers ceased, and peace returned to the village. However, the mountains still held their secrets, and the scars of this mystical trial remained etched in the souls of the villagers. The small mountain village had survived a supernatural ordeal, but the shadow of the unknown lingered, reminding everyone that there were forces beyond human understanding. The cobbled streets of the old town of Lyon seemed to breathe history. The facades of ancient buildings bore witness to the passage of time, but it was in a small bookstore nestled in the heart of the Traboul that the darkest story was about to unfold. The bookstore, L'Encre Mystérieuse, specialized in esoteric and ancient works. The owner, Mr. Leclerc, was a discreet man who had always maintained an air of mystery around his establishment. One day, a young woman named Camille, passionate about old books, crossed the door of the bookstore. Captivated by the enchanting atmosphere of the place, Camille spent hours exploring the dusty shelves. She discovered an old leather-bound book adorned with enigmatic runes. Intrigued, she bought it and decided to read it at home. From the first night, strange events began to occur. Inaudible whispers seemed to float in the air, and shifting shadows appeared on the walls of Camille's room. She heard light footsteps behind her, but when she turned around, no one was there. The pages of the book seemed to change every time she closed and reopened it. Mysterious symbols danced before her eyes, and she soon couldn't distinguish between dreams and reality. Nightmares haunted her, populated by ghostly silhouettes whispering indecipherable words. Concerned, Camille returned to the bookstore to question Mr. Leclerc about the book. However, upon her arrival, she found the bookstore deserted. Empty shelves and a chilling atmosphere seemed to testify to the sudden absence of the owner. Camille then understood that something unspeakable was linked to this book. The determined young woman delved further into the book, intent on unveiling the mystery. Paranormal manifestations intensified, taking on tangible forms. Spectral apparitions materialized in her apartment, repeating disturbing phrases. She was convinced that she had become the involuntary receptacle of dark forces. Resolved to end this nightmare, Camille embarked on a quest to understand the origin of the book and its malevolence. Her research led her to an ancient secret society that had once operated in the dark alleys of Lyon. She discovered that the book was linked to ancient rituals aimed at invoking unfathomable entities. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Camille attempted to sever the mystical connection between the book and supernatural forces. However, the boundary between the tangible world and the occult had become fragile, and the price to pay for breaking the bond was much higher than she could have imagined. The night she uttered the incantations to free her soul from the book, a storm broke out over Lyon. Lightning streaked across the sky, revealing ghostly silhouettes seemingly dancing in the darkness. When the storm subsided, the bookstore was once again plunged into silence, and Camille had vanished without a trace. Some claim they can still hear mysterious whispers near the L'Encre Mystérieuse bookstore in Lyon, and those who dare venture into its dark traboules may occasionally catch sight of a wandering silhouette, a shadow that seems to belong to another reality. The bookstore, meanwhile, remains closed, keeping its secrets in the corners of the old town. Title: The Shadow Puppets. In the sleepy town of Ravenswood, a place where shadows seem to dance of their own accord, existed an old puppet shop called the Shadow Workshop. Its owner, an old man with piercing eyes named Master Theodore, was renowned for creating the most realistic and mysterious puppets in the entire region. The beginning of the nightmare. One day, a young woman named Emily discovered the workshop while strolling through the narrow alleys of Ravenswood. Fascinated by the delicate art of puppets, she decided to acquire one of Master Theodore's creations. It was a wooden puppet with an expressive face, dark, enchanting eyes. As soon as Emily brought the puppet home, strange events began to unfold. At night, she could hear faint and indistinct whispers coming from the puppet. Shadows in her room seemed to come to life, taking the form of puppet silhouettes dancing in the moonlight. The curse of the puppets. As the nights passed, the puppet came more to life. Emily would find it sometimes in different positions than where she left it. Its gaze seemed to follow every movement in the room. Objects would mysteriously disappear and reappear. Concerned, Emily returned to Master Theodore to seek explanations. He revealed to her the dark history of his puppets. Each of them was imbued with a part of the deceased puppeteer's soul, giving life to a shadow seeking to reclaim its full existence. The shadow ritual. To free the trapped soul within the puppet, Emily had to perform a complex ritual in the shadow of the full moon. She embarked on a frightening quest through Ravenswood, collecting ancient artifacts and facing supernatural trials to break the curse. The unleashing of shadows. The ritual reached its climax in Master Theodore's workshop. As the full moon illuminated the room, the shadows of the puppets began to separate from their wooden bodies. Dark figures danced around Emily, forming a spectral whirlwind. Suddenly, Master Theodore's shadow emerged from the original puppet, thanking Emily for her liberation. The puppets returned to their inert state, but Emily felt the grateful gaze of the old man in the shadow. Ravenswood regained its tranquility, but the tale of the shadow workshop endured. The wooden puppets had returned to being mere works of art, but Master Theodore's shadow lingered, silently watching over the sleepy town, where shadows still danced in the moonlight. Title: The Echo of the Frozen Bells. It was Christmas Eve in London, where narrow streets sparkled with festive lights and markets buzzed with the excitement of preparations. However, within the heart of this joyful atmosphere, a dark tale lingered, haunting the deserted alleys of the city. The old orphanage. At the end of a seldom trodden alley stood an orphanage abandoned for decades. Broken windows reflected the intermittent glow of Christmas lights, creating an eerie atmosphere. It was said that the orphanage had been the scene of a tragic event during a past Christmas. The legend of Little Timmy. The legend spoke of an orphan child named Timmy, who mysteriously disappeared on Christmas night. Other children claimed to have heard whispers in the corridors and the sound of distant bells. Some even insisted they saw the shadow of a hooded figure at the window, the night of return. Decades later, a group of curious friends decided to explore the abandoned orphanage on Christmas night. Drawn by the legend of Little Timmy, they thought they might unravel the mystery shrouding the place. They entered the orphanage with trembling flashlights, leaving behind the joyful clamor of the city illuminated by decorations. The interior was cold, dusty, and the acrid scent of abandonment permeated every room. The ghostly bells. As they advanced down the main corridor, the friends began to hear strange noises. Indistinct whispers hung in the air, and the distant sound of bells seemed to guide them deeper into the orphanage. Suddenly, a door creaked open, revealing a room where the walls were adorned with photographs of children from a bygone era. In the center of the room, an old music box played a disturbing melody. The friends felt a chill in the air. The macabre discovery. As they explored further, the friends found a hidden door leading to a forgotten basement. There, they discovered an old abandoned playroom, but something horrific drew their attention. In the middle of the room, a hooded figure was frozen, holding an old music box playing the sinister melody. Panicking, the friends tried to leave the orphanage, but the hidden door had mysteriously vanished. The bells resonated louder, and the air was saturated with a chilling energy. The hooded figure approached slowly, its empty eyes fixed on the intruders. The eternal condemnation. The friends realized that the orphanage was haunted by Timmy's vengeful spirit. The hooded figure was his apparition, and the eerie melody of the music box was the mournful echo of his last Christmas. They tried to cry for help, but their voices seemed muffled by the ethereal atmosphere. The hooded figure reached out, and suddenly they were engulfed in darkness. Since that night, it is said that the orphanage's bells ring every Christmas Eve, carrying the icy echo of Timmy's macabre tale. The deserted alleys of London hold the memory of that night when lost innocence cried through time, transforming the orphanage into a cursed place where frozen bells toll for eternity. Title: The Shadow Puppets. In the sleepy town of Ravenswood, a place where shadows seem to dance of their own accord, existed an old puppet shop called the Shadow Workshop. Its owner, an old man with piercing eyes named Master Theodore, was renowned for creating the most realistic and mysterious puppets in the entire region. The beginning of the nightmare. One day, a young woman named Emily discovered the workshop while strolling through the narrow alleys of Ravenswood. Fascinated by the delicate art of puppets, she decided to acquire one of Master Theodore's creations. It was a wooden puppet with an expressive face, dark, enchanting eyes. As soon as Emily brought the puppet home, strange events began to unfold. At night, she could hear faint and indistinct whispers coming from the puppet. Shadows in her room seemed to come to life, taking the form of puppet silhouettes dancing in the moonlight. The curse of the puppets. As the nights passed, the puppet came more to life. Emily would find it sometimes in different positions than where she left it. Its gaze seemed to follow every movement in the room. Objects would mysteriously disappear and reappear. Concerned, Emily returned to Master Theodore to seek explanations. He revealed to her the dark history of his puppets. Each of them was imbued with a part of the deceased puppeteer's soul, giving life to a shadow seeking to reclaim its full existence. The Shadow Ritual. To free the trapped soul within the puppet, Emily had to perform a complex ritual in the shadow of the full moon. She embarked on a frightening quest through Ravenswood, collecting ancient artifacts and facing supernatural trials to break the curse. The Unleashing of Shadows. The ritual reached its climax in Master Theodore's workshop. As the full moon illuminated the room, the shadows of the puppets began to separate from their wooden bodies. Dark figures danced around Emily, forming a spectral whirlwind. Suddenly, Master Theodore's shadow emerged from the original puppet, thanking Emily for her liberation. The puppets returned to their inert state, but Emily felt the grateful gaze of the old man in the shadow. Ravenswood regained its tranquility, but the tale of the Shadow Workshop endured. The wooden puppets had returned to being mere works of art, but Master Theodore's shadow lingered, silently watching over the sleepy town, where shadows still danced in the moonlight. Title: The Broken Harmony. In a small town nestled among lush green hills, there existed an age-old legend that evoked both fascination and terror. Residents whispered about the mysterious entity known as Harmonia. The origin of the entity: centuries ago, in the heart of the dense forest surrounding the town, a peaceful community lived in harmony with nature. The villagers were bound by a mystical energy called Harmonia, a force that permeated every breeze, every leaf, and every murmur of the forest. However, an outsider's greed shattered this harmony. In search of wealth, the stranger discovered the secret of Harmonia and, driven by pure greed, sought to seize it. His impious actions caused a disruption in the delicate balance between natural forces. The birth of the entity, Harmonia, disturbed and wounded, came to life in the form of a swirling entity of dark energy. Deprived of its balance, it transformed into a vengeful force that roamed the corners of the forest, seeking to restore the lost harmony. The broken link, the villagers, once in communion with nature, became victims of the tormented entity. Strange events began to unfold. Rivers dried up, trees withered, and a melancholic murmur hung in the air. The entity demanded a tribute to soothe its pain. Every night, it materialized, a dark silhouette moving among the trees. The frightened inhabitants attempted to restore harmony through mystical rituals, but nothing could appease the entity's anger. The quest for redemption. A courageous young woman named Alara, determined to save her community, embarked on a perilous journey into the forest. Guided by the whispers of the wind, she discovered the ancient sanctuary where Harmonia was initially disturbed. There, she encountered the entity in its swirling form. Instead of fearing it, Alara felt a profound sadness emanating from Harmonia. She understood that the entity was a prisoner of its own pain. The resolution. In an act of bravery, Elara offered a handful of magical seeds to the entity. The seeds, symbols of renewal, merged with Harmonia's dark energy. A dazzling explosion of light occurred, sweeping through the forest. As the light faded, the forest was renewed. Rivers flowed once again, trees regained their vigor, and the melancholic murmur gave way to a soft and soothing melody. The transformed entity ascended into the sky like a benevolent constellation, watching over the town with restored harmony. The legend of Harmonia became a tale of redemption and renewal, teaching future generations the value of harmony and the necessity of preserving the delicate balance between humanity and nature. The Eternal Stranger. In the heart of the Nevada desert, where the endless sand seemed to swallow everything, lay a dark and unspeakable secret, Area 51. It was there that an extraterrestrial experiment went awry, releasing into the night a being from another reality, an elusive silhouette with luminous eyes, now known as the Eternal Stranger. Escaping from the secret depths of Area 51, the Eternal Stranger was not a mere fugitive. Its transcendental existence manifested in the nuances of twilight, a shifting shadow emerging from the depths of the unknown. Perplexed agents watched surveillance cameras capture spectral images of the escape. As the Eternal Stranger moved through the desert, an ethereal atmosphere accompanied it. Indistinct murmurs, cosmic whispers, rose in the wake of its passage. Distant observers recounted that the sky itself seemed to tremble under the will of this escaped entity. The residents of small neighboring towns were the first to feel the influence of the Eternal Stranger. Strange dreams, unsettling visions, plunged them into a state of perpetual fear. Some claimed that the strange silhouette materialized in their nightmares, an indefinable presence haunting their deepest thoughts. Research teams, sent by Area 51 to retrieve their extraterrestrial escapee, never returned quite the same. Some were found in a catatonic state, repeating meaningless phrases while others mysteriously disappeared, absorbed by the Eternal Stranger. The Eternal Stranger was not just an escaped creature, but an insatiable force that transcended our understanding of time and space. The precious nocturnes resonated with its influence, transforming the desert into a theater of the unspeakable, where the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. As the legend of the Eternal Stranger grew, residents found themselves trapped between fascination and terror. Some embarked on obsessive quests to find it, hoping to unravel the cosmic mysteries it carried. Others, frightened by the accounts of those who dared approach, barricaded their doors, fearing that the Eternal Stranger could slip into their lives. The Nevada desert, once a desolate landscape, had become the playground of the unknown, where the shadow of the Eternal Stranger persisted, elusive in the depths of the endless desert, carrying with it the promise of revealing unspeakable cosmic truths or submerging those who approached it in eternal darkness. Fissert story. This story happened 3 years ago. I had just returned from a vacation outside my town, and my bus dropped me off at the train station around 1:30 in the morning. I reached the main road and started looking for a taxi to get home, but there was neither a taxi nor anyone in sight. I stood there for 5 to 8 minutes, scanning both sides of the road, trying to find a taxi without success. Suddenly, to my left, I saw a girl in a white sari, a traditional outfit for women in my country. She wasn't there a moment before, standing about 10 meters under a streetlight. The fact that I hadn't seen her just before was rather eerie, but I thought I might have simply overlooked her while searching for a taxi. However, my heart immediately started beating fast when I looked to the other side to search for a taxi again, and upon turning back, she spoke to me, just a few steps away now. She had arrived at an astonishing speed, and my heart was almost pounding out of my chest with fear when she said, "Can you do me a favor?" I was trembling at that moment. I took 2 steps back. It was almost 2 a.m., and this girl in a white sari had appeared as if by magic. She mentioned that she needed to get home, it was quite late, and she would appreciate someone to accompany her, asking if I could do her this favor. It wasn't far from here. Just to provide context, at this hour, it's very unusual to see women alone outside at night, simply because it can be quite dangerous for a lone woman at this hour. Despite my fear, knowing this, I walked with her, fearing for her safety if I hadn't. We walked. I didn't want to talk or make eye contact. I didn't even ask her where she was going. I simply followed her, walking beside her but keeping my distance. She didn't say a word throughout the time we walked, which was unsettling. After walking for perhaps 15 minutes, we arrived at an iron gate. She made a cheerful face and said she didn't live far from here, thanking me. She turned around and started walking. I thought my job was done and began walking in the opposite direction to try to find my taxi again. Curiosity pinched my chest, and I wanted to know which way she had gone. When I turned my head, just seconds after she left, I looked, and there was no one there. I looked at the iron gate, and I couldn't see her beyond the distance, which would be unlikely given the few seconds that had passed since I last saw her. When I examined the gate more closely, I noticed there was a chain and a padlock around it, so there was no way for her to have unlocked it, closed it, and passed through in such a short time. That's when I looked up and saw the sign above the gate, and it said it was a cemetery. Then I started running. I saw a mosque in the distance. Thinking it would be a safe haven, I rushed towards it, opened the gates, and fell to the ground. The imam or priest came to greet me with a stick, thinking I was a thief. When he saw me on the ground, he spoke to me and asked what had happened, and I explained everything to him. He understood and told me the following story. 8 years ago, a girl was sexually assaulted, and her life was taken from her. People found her lifeless body under the streetlight, the same streetlight I had seen earlier. Her face was disfigured. No one could identify her, and no one came to claim the body. No complaint was filed with the police, and the perpetrators are still at large. Since no one claimed the body, the locals buried her in the cemetery. Since then, many people, especially young men, have had interactions with her, some hostile, others peaceful. I am glad that mine was different, and I don't think I will forget my encounter with the girl of the night anytime soon. Second story. I come from a small town in Iowa with around 7,000 inhabitants. Growing up in a small town, you become quite resourceful in finding fun things to do. You make the most of the entertainment you have. Urban legends are numerous and always fun to hear. I live not far from our capital, and as I grew up, I began venturing into the city. I made a lot of friends, and they loved hearing stories about my upbringing in such a small town and the fun things we did. They begged me to take them to a cemetery about 40 minutes from our house. It's a place I had only been to a few times. I admit that during the day, it's rather unremarkable. I know the area quite well as I've hunted there and taken some nighttime walks, but at night, it becomes quite eerie. Now, I want to clarify that I'm not the type to believe in the supernatural. If something strange happens, I'll seek a logical explanation. Tell me a haunted story and I'll roll my eyes, but there's no explanation for this one. So, one evening, friends from the city call me. They want to go to the cemetery and they want me to take them there. I agree, they come down to my place and we all set off around 8 p.m. It's mid-fall, so it's fairly dark at that time. We stand around smoking and chatting with each other, and there are 5 of us, and around 9 p.m. we head back. Part of this journey is on a paved highway, but the rest is on limestone, gravel roads, and about 10, maybe 15 kilometers at most from the cemetery. We took my friend's car, which was new at the time, a reddish-brown Pontiac G6. If you've ever driven on a limestone road, you know your car will be covered in a fine white dust. We arrive at the cemetery. The entrance is a large cast-iron gate. We enter, and I show them the gravestone. It's a very large tombstone from the early 20th century, and it has a very eerie phrase, something like, "Where you are now, I once was, and soon you will be where I am." Since reading it, I found that it's a fairly common thing on old tombstones. My friends agree. Yes, it's really creepy. They ask if anything has ever happened to me here. Not really, my car has overheated while driving in, but that's about it. Now, this tombstone is located in the back rows. Facing west and south, about 45 meters away, is a whole row of small children's graves. Just large enough to inscribe names on the tombstones, which were also quite small. Well, the urban legend says that if you run zigzag between these graves, you'll die. My friend starts mocking, saying it's the stupidest thing he's ever heard. He shouts that he's not afraid of stupid dead babies. I said, "I don't know, man. I've always heard that whenever someone does that, they die a week later." He tells me I'm an idiot. He starts running through them, gets halfway, and says he doesn't care about the supposed curse, but he doesn't complete the entire run and comes back walking. We teased him and asked if he was too scared to finish it, and he said, "Yeah, I got scared halfway." We went back to the entrance, smoked a few cigarettes, chatted for a few minutes, and I was ready to leave. I hadn't had dinner, and I was hungry. It was around 11 p.m., and we headed back to the town where I live. South of the town, there's a McDonald's. I go in and we grab some dinner. When we leave the car, it's under a street light and the car is well lit. When we get to the car, a friend notices that there are small handprints all over the car, at least 20 of them. They were the size of a 2-year-old child, but they weren't all the same size, though all were very small. They were on the trunk, on the roof. You could see them because they were traced in the gravel road dust. I remember looking very closely, and you could see fingerprints in the white dust, highlighting every ridge. And it's the strangest thing I've ever seen. There's no explanation. If they were there before we came out, they would have been covered by the dust. We couldn't figure out how a child could have gotten onto that car. There were no children where the car owner lived, nothing. We tried to find a reasonable explanation for their presence, but nothing made sense. I told my friend who had run between the graves to be careful. To this day, if it's brought up with him, he won't say a word, and will leave the room or get angry at you for mentioning it. And we're approaching 20 years since this happened. My sister and I had an experience that we will never forget. When I was about 7 years old and she was 9, our family moved into a house that was next to a huge cemetery. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of bodies buried here, along with a mausoleum that probably housed around 100. You couldn't see our house from the road because it was hidden by trees, but our driveway was long. And as you drove up our driveway, you literally read tombstones. It was convenient for my family at the time because my father worked in that cemetery as a gravedigger. As young children, my sister and I were not afraid of this house or the cemetery. We had never really been exposed to the idea of paranormal things. In fact, we spent a lot of time wandering around the cemetery and near the fountain that was there. We also visited our father while he worked, but my parents were a bit uneasy about the house as soon as we started living there. I remember them mentioning that there were holes in the corners of the room as if the previous owner had cameras in the house. But as kids, we didn't really understand why that would be strange. My maternal grandmother lived with us at the time. We called her Nanny. She had suffered strokes in the past and was quite frail. She couldn't walk very well and needed assistance with certain things. She was simply very frail, but at that time her mind was still sharp. My nanny's room and my sister's room were connected by a bathroom, with each room having a door leading to the bathroom. One day, my parents went grocery shopping and left us with Nanny to watch over us. It probably wouldn't have been a good idea to do so, but my sister and I were quite well behaved. We wouldn't do anything wrong or cause her any trouble. My sister and I were sitting in the middle of my sister's room playing on the floor when suddenly the bathroom door, which was closed, started shaking violently, as if someone was grabbing the door handle and shaking it as hard as they could. We immediately got up and went to get Nanny. She was sitting in the room watching television, and we stayed in her room until my parents came back. I'm sure it wasn't her because she would have said so. Even at that moment, there was no way for her to shake the door like that. My sister experienced other things in that house, like silhouettes watching her through the gap in her bedroom door. We also saw a little girl with black hair, mostly not inside our house but around it. It was the only paranormal thing I have ever experienced, but to me, it's significant. Especially because I wasn't the only one to notice it, and my nanny was there to confirm that it wasn't her. Before I start my experience, I want to explain something first. Unfortunately, my father's father passed away when my father was only 13 years old, and growing up, I knew nothing about who he was. I knew he was in the Royal Navy, and apart from that, he was a mystery to me. At that time, I never wanted to ask my father, uncles, or grandmother about him because my grandmother never loved again after his tragic death. I remember when I was a child, around 4 or 5 years old, my grandmother had a photo on her bedside table with herself and some people in a bar somewhere. There were 2 men in the photo, and I never really knew which one was my grandfather. Now let's get to the main story. This happened in 2012, and I was about 18 years old at the time. My 13-year-old brother Don and I went to our local cemetery. It may sound morbid, but we had good intentions because our older brother Louis and our great-uncle Tom were buried there, and we used to pay tribute to them by cleaning their graves and removing the weeds covering them. Shortly after finishing, Don needed to use the restroom, and the cemetery happened to have toilets on the opposite side. As we approached, I had this strange feeling of being watched, and when Don tried to open the restroom door, to our surprise it was locked. That rarely happened. It was bad. He was desperate. And our house was 20 minutes away, so I told him to pee behind the toilets, and no one would see him. Then, out of the corner of my eye, about 10 meters away, I saw this guy staring at me. I turned to face him, and it was almost like a staring contest. He reminded me a bit of my father's brother, Uncle Andy. but I knew it wasn't him because he lived 2 towns away. He would have come over and asked me what I was doing in the cemetery, and the guy wasn't wearing glasses, whereas my uncle wears them, or he can't see. Then out of the corner of my eye, about 10 meters away, I saw this guy staring at me. I turned to face him, and it was almost like a staring contest. He reminded me a bit of my father's brother, Uncle Andy, but I knew it wasn't him because he lived 2 towns away. He would have come over and asked me what I was doing in the cemetery, and the guy wasn't wearing glasses, whereas my uncle wears them, or he can't see. So I turned to Don and asked what was taking so long, and when I turned back, the guy in question had disappeared. A few weeks later, my brother and I asked my grandmother for information about our mysterious grandfather, so I reminded her that if she didn't want to talk about it, we would drop it. As I mentioned before, I didn't want to upset her, so my brother went to talk to her, and I heard him call me, so I went to his room, and when I entered, she was smiling and happy to show pictures of herself, my father, and my uncles, and one of them caught my attention. It was my grandfather. He looked exactly like the man staring at me in the cemetery. Could it have been him? I was the eldest in a family of 6 children and was particularly close to my brothers and sisters. Our house was located in a peaceful residential neighborhood where everyone knew each other. Most houses were occupied by families with children around our age, so we had many friends in the neighborhood. However, there was a house in our neighborhood that had a reputation for being haunted. It was a large wooden house with an overgrown lawn, situated at the end of the street. Among the children, rumors circulated that the house was haunted by a woman who had been killed by her husband decades ago. No one had lived in that house for many years, and it looked eerie with its broken windows and shutters creaking in the wind. We had never ventured near that house, preferring to avoid that scary place. One day, when I was about 10 years old, my brothers and I were playing outside with our neighborhood friends. We were playing hide and seek, and I was the one seeking. I started searching around our street and eventually ended up in front of the haunted house. I noticed something strange, a faint light shining behind one of the windows of the house. I was curious and scared at the same time, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I began to approach the house. The closer I got, the stronger the light seemed to become. I began to hear strange noises, indistinct whispers, and faint scratching. I was terrified, but I couldn't help but continue forward. Eventually, I reached the window behind which the light was on. I peered inside, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. There was a silhouette of a woman in a white dress floating in the room. She didn't seem to notice me, but stared intently ahead, as if looking at something invisible. Panic overcame me, and I sprinted back to my friends and my house. I never told anyone about what I had seen that day, but the image of the floating woman in the white dress haunted me for years. I never went near that house again, but I always wondered if what I had seen was real or just a product of my imagination. However, the image of that woman haunted my dreams and thoughts, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was truly the ghost of the woman rumored about in the neighborhood.